Welcome to this special broadcast about the future of KPFA and Pacifica Radio. It's produced by Emily Sykes and an all-volunteer crew here at the Community Media Center of Marin. I'm your host, Peter B. Collins, and I'd like to begin with a disclaimer that there's a lot about Pacifica and KPFA that I don't know. I have admired the mission of Pacifica Radio for a long time, and I've worked in the radio business, but I've never had any direct contact or been involved in producing programs at Pacifica or at KPFA. And we have a great panel here with us in the studio this evening. Let me start with Adrienne Laube, who has been a programmer at KPFA for 14 years and hosts the Pushing Limits program, which is by and for people with disabilities. Adrienne, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Also, Peter Frank is a former board member and former president of the Pacifica Foundation. He's long been involved in legal aspects of communication and public access to the media. Peter, thanks for being with us tonight.
Thanks very much for having me.
And Tracy Rosenberg is here. She's the Executive Director of Media Alliance and a former treasurer of the Pacifica Radio Network. Tracy, good to have you with us.
Thanks.
And on the phone from New York is Bill Crozier. He joined us in our last program, which we did in November, and he has since taken the position as the new unpaid interim executive director of Pacifica Radio. He's the former chair and president of the Houston Peace and Justice Center and has been very active with the Pacifica radio station in Houston. Bill, thanks for being with us.
Glad to be here.
Now, I'd like to begin with you, Bill, and get an update. First of all, how do you feel about taking on the responsibility of executive director? It's a tough job, and people who have taken it on before have met with many challenges and often early exits. So tell us about how you view this opportunity to try to deal with the myriad of issues that relate to the future of Pacifica and its local radio stations.
Okay, well, that's a good question. I guess, well, my wife thought I was crazy when I said I would do this, and maybe she's right. But she really supports Pacifica and all of our stations also, and she understands. But it's a bit scary. We have a lot to recover from. There's a lot of issues that have been going on for a number of years that have led to our financial problems. And, I've been on the board on and off for a number of years, as well as several of the other people there. And so, that we have a lot of catching up to do, but I'm really committed to trying to get us out of our financial doldrums, and so we can rebuild it, really have a stronger Pacifica, stronger KPFA, all of our stations. I think our country really needs Pacifica now more than ever, even more than when Lou Hill and his friends first founded KPFA back in the late 1940s.
Mm-hmm. So, Bill, if we use a triage metaphor, what are the most urgent tasks that are on your agenda right now?
I guess the most urgent things right now are getting the audits caught up. We're about to start the FY 2015 audit, and it should have been finished in 2016, and obviously it's not. And then as soon as we finish that, we need to get the 2016 audit finished. So we're looking at trying to get the FY 2015. This is the year that ended September 30th, 2015, just to give you an idea how late this is. Trying to get the audit for that year started within a week. The audit committee, the National Audit Committee, is meeting tomorrow. We're hoping they will come up with an auditor recommendation, and then we can get them on board right away. We've been busy getting preparations done at all the stations. KPFA, frankly, was the one that was the furthest behind and was hardest getting all the audit schedule completed. I think they're ready now, or will be by the end of this week. But we want to try to make sure that we're ready and that we can actually do the audit without significant delays. The last two audits were really expensive and took a long time, partly because not all the preparations were complete before they started, and also because there was problems getting additional information to the auditors after they got started. a good thing. We also have a lawsuit. That's why I'm in New York right now. That the Empire State Building is doing this because of unpaid power rent, and this is an obligation that was started back in 2005. That a person like me, an interim executive director, signed a contract that's for 15 years, and the lease amounts go up just astronomical amounts, and so they haven't been able to keep up with the payments. And this is an obligation for all of Pacifica, even though it is for the WBI transmitter. But I was here. We had a meeting today doing some negotiations with the Empire State Building folks to see if we can work out a settlement.
Now, Bill, let's talk about the audits a bit.
Okay.
You know, I do understand that one of the critical funding issues is that without a qualified or certified audit, that Pacifica and its stations don't qualify for government grants, particularly from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Now, it's great to hear that the backlog on audits is being addressed, but we're also seeing that in the budget proposed by the Trump administration, they're planning to come pretty close to zeroing out funding for the CPB.
No, it's great.
What other funding would be available to Pacifica from foundations or other government entities, including at the state level, if the audits are brought up to date and pass the fundamental accounting tests?
Well, I'm not sure we get any government funding without that. There are private foundations that would fund a lot of the things we're doing. Many of them also require that we have current audited financial statements, though. So we've lost out on a lot of those also. We've lost, that was the third year, we've lost close to $1 million in each of the last 3 years in CPB funding. Now, I'm hoping we will requalify before the end of this year by getting caught up on our audits, and I'm hoping we can get perhaps half of the FY 2018 CPB funding to get their grants. Because if you're, for example, if you don't qualify for the half of the year, you can still potentially get money for the other half of the year. And CPB funds are appropriated 2 years in advance. So the fiscal year 2018 CPB grants money was allocated last year by Congress. Hopefully they won't pull the rug out from under that, because all the stations all over the country need that for their own planning and budget purposes. And I'm hoping Congress does approve CPB funding. They remember a number of years back, the people were putting a big fuss about, why are you killing big birds when there was a proposal, to slash CPB funding. And the same thing would probably happen again. But I can't guarantee what would happen with this Congress or this president. That is scary.
And Bill, let me clarify what you're saying there. If the audits are brought up to speed, is there money already in the pipeline from previous years that could flow to Pacifica even before CPP budgets get cut or eliminated?
Well, normally CPP funding is appropriated 2 years in advance. So like I'm saying, if they cut the funding now, it would probably affect things starting in fiscal year 2019. This FY 17 ends in September. We're over halfway through fiscal year 2017. FY 18 starts in October. That money's already there. CPP already has it. It's already been appropriated. Unless some Congress tries to get it back. So I'm assuming we should be able to get part of the FY 18 funds. This depends on when we finish getting caught up on our audits. I can't guarantee it, but I think there's a really good chance that we will do that. And we're trying really hard to qualify for that. We probably won't get back the previous 3 years worth of CPB money that we've lost, though. Those grants are probably gone.
Okay. And
one of the real concerns that I and the others on the National Board have had for the last several years, because it's a real shame that we lost that money. We shouldn't have lost it. We should have been pushing to make sure that the audits were done on time, every year, because they always were up until about 3 years ago.
so, Bill, let me ask a kind of process question here related to the transmitter lease there, the tower on the Empire State Building.
Okay.
And as you investigate the status of various issues at Pacifica, can you put in place any safeguards to prevent a local station manager or other individual from signing an agreement like this that puts the financial foundation of the entire organization at risk?
Well, that's a good question. You know, the local station board and the general manager did not sign the contract. That's why I say it's really an obligation of all of Pacifica. It was signed by an interim executive director in 2005, who wasn't from that station either, so it was somebody like me. And for whatever reason, they decided to do this. Now, just bear in mind, historically, if you recall, all the antennas on the World Trade Center were destroyed, and the Empire State Building, which was the next, I guess, best location, could charge almost anything they wanted to for tower space. And they were in really big demand by TV and radio stations all over the New York area. And so they weren't charging a big premium. I think the mistake was signing a 15-year contract, letting do that, and the amount of the rent and the cost of living adjustments just goes up astronomically. We're supposed to be paying about 4 times the market rate right now, or more than 4 times the market rate, and it's just not sustainable. So it wasn't a decision of WBI to do this. It was a decision of Pacifica, and so that's why I'd like to point out to people that we need all living up to our obligation and try to get the best deal we can out of this, because it affects all of Pacifica. And it wasn't WBI's choice to go with this particular contract, or especially for this duration of the 15-year contract with these really large annual increases.
And Bill, I can imagine that in Houston there are Pacifica members who say, you know, why should we have to pay for New York's mistake? And I can imagine there's that kind of local thought at every station in the network. But this is really
wasn't New York's mistake. That's my point.
But it is kind of at the center of discussions about the future and viability.
Yeah.
Is it all for one and one for all, or is this going to be a situation where each local station is going to have to fend for itself?
Well, first, it is a legal obligation of the Pacifica Foundation for all of Pacifica, because there's one legal entity. So Pacifica doesn't own the debt and the obligation. And so if the Empire State Building moves to force payment on the debt, for example, theoretically they could grab the money from any station. And there was a case last year where another creditor got a legal judgment against Pacifica for a debt at another station, and they took over $90,000 from wherever they could get it, which happened to be from KPFA, just because they happened to have that much money in their account at the time that I think they just finished a fund drive. It could have just as easily have come from KPFA or anywhere else also. What I want to do is make sure that we can get all the stations sustainable. That's one of my goals, so that we can all the stations can pay their bills to get out of this tower lease that we have at WBI, which is really unsustainable and unreasonable. And we're a building strong for Pacifica. Again, our country needs it, so the world probably needs it. And I think we're a lot stronger together. We stick together and make sure we have all the stations as strong as possible.
Bill, one thing that's come to my attention is that you learned, apparently inadvertently, a month or two ago about a plan called Big Tent Radio. And I understand that Carol Travis, local board chair here in the Bay Area, was working with individuals. And I guess the most charitable way to view this is that it was a fallback plan in the event that the network or that individual stations end up at risk or in a bankruptcy type situation. What can you tell us about Big Tent Radio and your reaction to learning about this?
Well, that's another good question. I understand the position, I guess, that she had. If she wanted to try to have, in fact, I talked to her before I sent the information out. but well, it was that little background. What I found out was two different people from different stations told me about letters that some prominent people had received, asking them to join the board of this new organization, Big Tent Radio, and to be on their board. They were looking for people who were well-known, prominent. I can't mention the name, but I learned of at least two different ones, and each of them I got a copy of the letter that they were sent from Carol Travis. So I know that it's real, and I called Carol before I did anything about it, and I gotta put it out in the public, but she trying to put this politely, she didn't exactly say that she was doing this, but then I went ahead and sent it out publicly to let people know that this is what was happening, and then she called back and apologized for misleading me. And the thing I think that was the potentially most damaging, maybe she didn't feel it was that she was telling people in writing in this letter that Pacifica was collapsing. She used that word several times, collapsing, and it's not collapsing. We do have some challenges, and we're trying to deal with them. We've sent a financial recovery and stabilization plan to the Attorney General to reassure them. I haven't heard any complaints from them, and it's not going to be something we solve overnight, but there's a lot of progress we're being made. And the danger with telling people bad things about Pacifica is it actually could decrease donation. That's what we don't want to happen, because I think there's an awful lot of potential here, and I know there's people, thousands and thousands of people at each of our station areas all around the country who do want Pacifica to be stronger and do want all of our stations to survive. So I think that's over with now, the Big Tent Radio thing. The good news is that I know there's a lot of people that were alarmed and realized that this could hurt us, and that they care so much about Pacifica and about KPFA and about all of our stations. They want to make sure that we do better and that we actually get donors instead of driving them away.
All right, now let me turn to my panelists here in the studio. Tracy, starting with you. What is your comment on the Big Tent Radio proposal and the manner in which it surfaced?
Well, I think that the name is kind of funny, a big tent, because it sort of implies a circus tent, like we've all seen those big top kind of things, because really it's kind of circus-y to have an organization running in such a way that the chair of your local board, who's supposed to be KPFA's biggest booster and supporter, is essentially running around saying things are collapsing, it's the end of the world, rats are leaving the sinking ship, including me, jump aboard. And anyone who's run an organization knows that you can't walk out there and say, my organization is falling apart and I am turning on it,
Man the lifeboats.
Yeah, exactly. So you basically have a situation where you sort of have an internal demolition process going on that's going to endanger all 5 stations, and that essentially isn't creating or building. Mm-hmm. It's destroying and it's undermining. And that's not what a board is for.
Now, I heard a recording of a recent board meeting where Carol Travis said, look, this was not secret, but she used the term walled off and said that she was doing it quietly. Do those distinctions mean anything?
No, and in the similar situation, and it's important to understand this is the second time we went through this in 2015, the similar organization called the KPFA Foundation. Same idea, and in that one we were told it wasn't clandestine, it was just secret. Same kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. All right. Peter Frank, what's your comment on the Big Tent idea and the way it became known?
I think it's almost irrelevant, and certainly bad faith. Somebody who thinks the organization is declining. Well, let me put it another way. If you're in a responsible position in an organization, if you think it's declining, you either build an alternative which accelerates the decline, or you work to decelerate the decline and do something about the fundamental problems in the organization. This is a case of divided loyalty, which is just totally inappropriate.
And is it a violation of the Pacifica bylaws?
I haven't read all 75 pages. I think it's a violation. I haven't looked it up. I'm a lawyer. I think it's a violation of the fiduciary duty of a board chair to the foundation, because the boards technically are committees of the national board of the foundation, which has ultimate responsibility for it. And it's one of the reasons that the California Attorney General is investigating the operation of Pacifica, its regulatory organization in charge. I think it's a sign of a much bigger problem that Pacifica has, which I hope we will get to.
Okay. Adrian, what's your comment on Big Tent?
You know, I think that we're talking about managing the public image of Pacifica. And in my mind, we are in deep financial problems. It is not far to say it's collapsing. I'm really appreciative of the work Bill's doing, and I think the transparency that he's doing it with has done a lot in the short term to shore up some of the foundational pieces. But the fact is, there's real financial problems that are not going to go away easily. So we are a membership organization, right? We should be talking to our members, but we also want donors. So we want to put a good face on that for donors. This is a little contradiction. Now, the other thing is that within Pacifica, we are always eating our own for breakfast. So when someone who says, hey, I have a good idea, decides not to go through the regular channels to take care of it, I understand that. I understand why. And I think that the kind of public trashing that Carol has gotten for this, I don't think it was a great thing what she did. It wasn't a great idea, frankly. But she has suffered immense harm reputation-wise, which if I had a great idea tomorrow, I wouldn't do it, because the minute people find out, whichever faction it is. And so I hope we get a chance to talk about the factions and the internal dissension, because I think that's key to whatever we do in terms of stabilizing.
Well, let's turn to Bill and look for miracles. Bill,
Yeah.
the history of Pacifica is riddled with infighting, turf battles, petty squabbles, and really important struggles. And there are many people who are committed to the central mission of Pacifica, but they interpret it in personal ways. Sometimes to say that, well, it's my show, and I own it, and I'm going to keep it until I decide to quit it. And so I'm sympathetic to the challenges that you face, but is this fundamentally a dysfunctional organization? And do you believe that it can be straightened out and streamlined in ways that serve the listeners and also address the concerns of the people, some paid but mostly volunteers, who keep the needle moving on these radio stations?
Well, I think it can be straightened out. I wouldn't be doing all that I'm doing, and I know a lot of other people wouldn't be putting all the time and effort into it they're doing if they didn't listen also. But we do have a ways to go, and I must admit that our government and our board have been a real failure. I've been really concerned for some time because I and most of the people on our board were elected for political reasons. We're political activists. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we know anything about how to be good board members. So what we're trying to do, or what I want to do, is see what we can do to get our bylaws changed. In particular, how the boards are selected. I think it's a problem. I think the way we're selecting boards almost guarantees that you're going to have dysfunctional boards. And we have to fix that. And I've talked to people at each of the stations I've been visiting, and I've been kind of impressed that there's a lot of support for this at almost every station, those 4 of the stations. And I think we have to do that. I think we need to do it this year because we can't wait any longer. And it's actually one of the things that we put in the plan that we wrote for the Attorney General with their financial recovery and stabilization plan. They wanted to know what we're going to do. And one of the things that I put in there that at least we want to do, we hope to do, is to fix our bylaws. And so that's something I think everybody can be looking forward to later this year. I'm not sure what the details will be, but I think we have to figure out a way of making our boards function better.
Peter,
so we don't have so much infighting.
let me turn to you, Peter, because you've been involved with Pacifica for decades now, and you've seen a lot. Can it be fixed? Is there enough goodwill and trust among the various parties and factions to find a way to move forward?
Well, let me say this. I think it's more than fixing it. I think Pacifica has some very serious external threats that we need to get to. But to answer your question, I think, and I and some others have advocated some kind of consensus building process where we get some people who really know how to mediate and bring people together in an organization to get us into system-wide dialogue so that we can have a consensus on how to change the bylaws. It's very difficult to change the bylaws the way they're written. It may need judicial intervention. I'm inclined to think that what's needed quickly, in terms of what Bill said, is an interim rewriting of the bylaws for much smaller boards, more authority to the local station boards, and then a larger process of reorganization of the whole organization.
Now, at the expense of offending people by making a pun about a flagship program, is Pacifica ready for democracy now? or does it require some sort of tough love management in order to deal with the issues and restructure?
Well, let me speak to this because I was on the old board before the crisis of '99, and I and some others believed strongly that became a self-perpetuating board. That was very dangerous. It allowed a coup from Washington to almost happen. I and a lot of people thought that we need democratic boards elected by the listeners. That clearly hasn't worked because, as one well-known programmer said to me in 1999, the listeners are just not that involved with Pacifica, and they're not going to pay enough attention to meaningfully participate in the elections. And I think we all have failed by putting out election cards, propaganda, that read like motherhood. If you read the various slates programs, you couldn't tell what they really stand for. So the electoral process in Pacifica has not worked, and it's been harmful because it's accentuated conflict rather than cooperation.
Tracy, do you agree?
To some degree, but I think it's important to separate structure from culture because they're kind of two different things. And you do have some challenges on both fronts, but they're not the same. When it comes to structure and bylaws, you're largely talking about how decisions are made. And as Peter is saying, there was a sort of hierarchical, self-perpetuating board decides everything and picks themselves structure. And then there was a huge reaction to that. So you ended up with almost the opposite, which was checks and balances from heaven, and a situation where essentially nobody can do anything without the permission of 6 or 7 other bodies. Mm-hmm. And essentially you have a situation where everybody can stop anything from happening. But it's very, very hard for anyone to actually cause anything to happen. And you can do certain things structurally to modify that, and we should right away, because it was essentially a pendulum swing from too far on this side to way too far on the other side. Mm-hmm. But then you get to the organizational culture stuff, and that's more complicated. And that's where I think some kind of outside help facilitation consensus might actually factor in, because really, you kind of said it, Peter, it's my show and I should have it for 30 years. And if I don't, then things are really, really wrong and there's a riot about to start out here. That's pretty much what the history of Pacifica has been. And essentially, it prevents the organization from being able to change with the times, and it prevents it from being, not to use buzzwords, but flexible and innovative in the way that media organizations kind of need to be, because things are changing very fast. And it's hard because people work for free or for almost no money, and they do it for passion and for love, and they don't want that passion and love to be sort of rolled back on them. But the organization has to be able to move, and it has to be able to change.
Adrian, how do you see the balance?
I think we need some sort of hybrid. And one kind of idea that has, actually Tracy mentioned to me years ago was let's elect program councils. Because I think the listeners care about the programming, so let's let the listeners have some more input in programming. But maybe we need boards that are partly appointed, and we can get some of the technical people that we need. Financial wizards, we really need people who can read a spreadsheet. And then maybe a few, some balance of elected and non-elected. I think the problem, the reason we keep coming back, I keep coming back to this, let's have a facilitated discussion, is that when you get into the weeds about anything, smaller boards, who's going to be appointed, who's going to appoint the appointed ones, it becomes immediately stuck in this mire of old revenge hatreds from decades ago, some of them. And we really need to have a way to break through that and bring in maybe a bunch of new people too who are not already acculturated that way.
Now, as we're discussing this, I have a local example. Marin's General Hospital is nominally run by a public board. And it was the activists who were able to populate that board and cancel the awful contract with Sutter Health to run the hospital. But in the aftermath of that, there was another reorganization, and the publicly elected trustees are not actually running the hospital anymore. They hired an outside CEO, and he insisted on installing an operating board that doesn't really directly report to the elected trustees. And I've got a big problem with that when it comes to my community hospital. As I look at operating radio stations, though, taxpayer money isn't involved, and it's not life or death like operating a hospital. And I really, wonder, as just an outside observer, if everybody can recognize how unwieldy the current system is, how do we move from acknowledgement of that to some sort of meaningful reform that can give new strength and vitality to the organization? Bill, let me start with you.
Well, that is a question. I'm not quite sure how to do it. I mean, one of the things I'm doing is talking to people at different stations, see who's interested in working on the bylaws. I'd like to get, like Peter and Tracy and whoever else is, Adrienne, if she's interested, to participate in that. Anybody else, I'd like to see from different stations. I've already kind of started the process a little bit in putting forward a list of sort of problems that we need to resolve. For example, we just talked about the dysfunction on the board and the time wasting that we go through on the board, and the fact that we have people on the board that, as Adrian was saying, don't know what a spreadsheet is and don't pay attention to the finance. That's how we got into the financial problems we're in now, because there wasn't enough attention paid for a number of years on our finances, even though there were some of us on the board were talking about it for some time. The majority, it didn't get their attention. So I think we need to start in this process, but move pretty quickly in finding people who are willing to work together, and even if they don't agree on everything, let's talk politely and work through this, because I think there are going to be, the devil's always in the details. There's going to be some challenges, and I think we need to learn from either the Marin County Hospital District and any other nonprofits that brought through board changes and see what worked and what didn't. But I think and also as Peter was saying, maybe we need something as an interim that would fix some of our biggest problems and then move towards maybe a more comprehensive solution next year perhaps, or however long it takes. So we need to do something pretty quick, I think.
Peter Frank.
Well, Bill, I love what you're doing. I think it's vital, but I think we've got to look bigger. I disagree, Peter, with you that it's not a matter of life and death in the era of Trump. Pacifica has 5 very powerful radio stations, among the most powerful FM stations because they were some of the earliest ones on the FM dial. The signal reaches 20-25% of the population of the United States. Pacifica has an affiliate program of smaller community stations of about 150 stations. So there you've got 30-35% of the population. If they were listening, Trump wouldn't have been elected. So it is a matter of life and death to have a healthy organization that can reach a very broad portion of the population. And I think the financial problem is simply a reflection of an organizational problem and an audience problem, that we are working with a model that was brilliant in 1947 and is a Model T in 2017. And the structure of Pacifica and the self-interest and some other reasons has prevented Pacifica from adapting to a very different age in the media world, social media, other kinds of interactive media, other kinds of media. We're operating with an old model that's not really working, and it's only old people like myself who are listening anymore, and we're not going to be around forever. So the fundamental question is how to really reorganize the organization and modernize it, both in its governance, certainly, and in its broadcasting. If you don't talk about broadcasting, it's like the board of directors of General Motors not talking about cars.
Okay, Adrian?
So we have a long-term problem about how to run this wonderful conglomeration of stations, and there's I think up to 200 affiliate stations now. So one of the fundamental questions is, will the individual stations pay into the general fund enough to do the kind of things that the centralized substructure would need, like have human resources people, so we're not always getting sued because our managers don't really know what the rules are. That's something that's been going on for a long time. Then we have, and maybe we don't want to do it. Maybe we say we really do want to be separate stations. Maybe we would all like to be affiliates and just pay a sort of nominal fee. We're all interested in that big, exciting idea of the potential of all of this. Why can't we influence national politics? But we've never quite reached that. So maybe we just don't really, as a whole, want to do that. Maybe what we want to do is have very strong local stations with some affiliation and some program exchange. So that's, if we have these discussions, we might discover where's the will of the group. And then we have the problem right now, which Peter responded to, which is things are changing. We're behind times. Our audience isn't there. We don't know how to use social media effectively. We need to retool. And anybody who looks at that's going to say that's going to cost a bunch of money. You know, you can do a lot with volunteers, but it's going to cost a lot. So where do we get the money for that when Bill is going to spend a lot of time and all of us trying to just stabilize what we have right now?
Mm-hmm. Tracy Rosenberg.
Well, I mean, on the general question, it's always an efficiency versus accountability, democracy, and transparency question, and it's the old Mussolini and the trains run on time kind of question. Yes, you can run things effectively. There is a sacrifice on the side of accountability and transparency. On the other hand, you do need the trains to run. We've got to find a better balance. Mm-hmm. In terms of, you know, whether you want a national network or 5 sort of struggling individual community radio stations, I don't think that's even a discussion, to be honest. You've got 220 affiliate radio stations all over the country, including in the Rust Belt and the Red Belt, that really are looking for national programming from this organization. They have nowhere else to get it. And to abandon that kind of responsibility is, I think, absolutely crazy. And the reality is, of course, the stations don't want to pay, as it were, central services or a tithe. Nobody wants to lose $1 more than they have to. But they can't operate independently. They don't even run their own payroll. They don't fill out their own tax returns. They don't have any HR. These are not functioning organizations. They've never in their whole existence operated independently, and the costs of doing so are much higher than the costs of staying together. So I think what you have to do is you have to find some way to make this work. I mean, you've got a historical archive going back for 60 years. It's jointly owned, and it really would be throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And
So-
it's a fantasy in people's head that all the problems wouldn't be there. But the truth is, if you take a large, sinking entity and chop it up into 5 pieces, you have 5 sinking entities.
Yeah. So let's turn our conversation to the future and look at some ideas to continue the mission, produce strong original programming that I agree, Peter, is definitely needed in this country. But I'm a guy who got the radio virus when I was a kid, and it still infects me. But objectively, I know that the audiences for AM talk radio, the median age is now 67 years old. For FM music radio, the median audience age is in the upper 40s. And it's very clear that people under 40 don't listen to AM radio at all, and they don't listen to much FM radio. It's not compelling to them. And so I would make the case that long term, Pacifica should make a plan not to desert the terrestrial radio spectrum, but to de-emphasize that in favor of podcasting and other types of online presentation where you could become a hub for independent programmers as opposed to the turf struggles that you face with people who've had a certain time slot for a long time. And this kind of an on-demand model is, and I want to thank Emily for tipping me off about this. There's a guy named Ken Friedman who runs WFMU, which is in Jersey City, and they have shifted to this audience engine model. And all of their programs are available on demand online, just like a cable menu, cable TV menu. And they say that they're now, because it has social media elements to it and a fundraising component, that they are able to raise about 70% of their budget directly online. So all of this, I think offers a vision going forward. Bill, have you explored some of these models, and do you have any favorites or anything that has stood out as a potential approach that could fit into the current Pacifica model while providing opportunities going forward?
Well, actually, this is really a good question because actually, when I was in New York again this previous time in March, I did go visit Ken Friedman at WFMU, and I talked to him about their station and their audience engine that they're working on. It's not really released publicly yet, but they do indeed have a pretty good setup. Now, it's all music. It's a different kind of station than most of what we have. They have one fund drive a year, and it raises almost all their money. And you're right, they get a lot of online donations, and I think we can learn from them. They have several music streams, not just one. And one of the things I want to do, and I've actually talked to some of our tech people around the network, and everyone I have talked to says that's a good idea, we just need to get it going, is to start some additional web streams in addition to what we already have. We're also talking about maybe upgrading AudioPort, which is our internet program distribution service. It's exclusively just for stations right now. It's not for the public, so that all of our affiliates and all our 5 main stations can share programming with each other. But we'd like to upgrade that to make it easier for the public to get to those kind of programs. Requires them more of an investment there in infrastructure. The streaming is not so expensive, but it does take some extra effort. But the hard part is producing good programs. So we've already got those produced. What I want to do is just make it easier for people to get to them. Because you're right, people want to listen to the things, whatever they want to listen to, when they want to listen to it, not when a particular station has it on the schedule. And that's why so many people, especially younger people, are listening online. It's not just podcasts, it's also web streams. And I think we need to do that. And I don't think radio is going to die just like it didn't die when TV came along. But a lot more people are listening at other ways. And we do have to face reality. The public broadcasting all over the country has had a decrease in listenership and revenue over the last 10 or 15 years. And that's probably the reason, because more people are listening other ways. So of a threat to us, but it's also an opportunity because it's a way of reaching people outside of our geographic regions. We get to people all over the country, even all over the world through the internet, and we just have to make sure it's easy to get to, and that we let people know how to get that kind of programming.
And Bill, if you could share with us just in ballpark terms, what kind of traffic does Pacifica get on the websites of the individual radio stations?
I don't know. It varies a lot by station. KPFA redid their website a few months ago. It looks pretty nice. And KPFK is in the process of getting theirs redone also. It had some problems the last couple of years, and it's much, much better now. The other three stations' websites do need some improvements. Websites do take work. One of the things I want to do is try to figure out how we can get volunteers to help with that. People want to see new content there all the time. So that means, ideally daily you want to be providing new information there. I mean, KPFA is a good model. They have a big staff to help do that, but the other stations, the smaller ones, need to figure out how to let volunteers do more of that.
Peter?
I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, I would put out a challenge, Bill, I'd put out a challenge to you to write a budget to what it would cost to actually modernize the Pacifica radio, to have it use all the tools that are now available and develop as much of a mass audience as it could. I very much, there's lots of stories about people in charge of computers at various stations who don't want to upgrade to even the newer computers because they don't understand them. To truly modernize the system is going to take some real money and some real planning. I would love to see a budget for that, and then I think we need to talk about where we get the money to finance it, because there has to be a total overhaul if the thing isn't going to. It's been a long 20 years, 15 years decline, and it's still declining, and the income is declining, the expenses have been cut to the bone, and if that continues, it's just going to disappear.
Adrian?
Well, I really like the audience engine. I think it's exciting because it's planned for nonprofit radio stations, non-commercial. And it's got a lot of exciting pieces to it. But I guess I'm with Peter. It takes a lot of resources. You're going to have to shift resources within the station to keep your website great, which KPFA's is probably better than it was, but it's still not great. And then training. There's a lot of volunteers, but even paid staff don't label their programs, which means that anyone who comes to find a program can't just find a short description of it. It just takes a little training, but it takes consistency. So these are, it's kind of hard to bring them up because right now Pacifica is in such a, gosh, we've got to get this audit done and we've got to deal with the Empire State Building. It's really hard to think long term and say, well, yeah, and we need like $4 million to do this other thing. But I think Peter's right. We really have no choice.
Tracy?
Well, I guess I would say that you can't use all the tools. There's a million tools out there. And, modernizing is sort of an adjective. The question is sort of, what do you want to be? Exactly. And it's important for Pacifica to have a niche and not to be an imitator or to try to do something that's already being done by someone else out there who's had a 10-year head start. You really have to figure out where that unique place is in the marketplace that you want to be, and then how you can get from A to B. But what I will say is that I think you have to look at visuals and video. I think that people are more visual, perhaps, than they were in previous generations, and that's important. Mm-hmm. And if you look at that show that we punned on earlier, you will note that it has a video component, sure. Although it's not the best TV show in the world. There is room for improvement there. But, and the other thing that I would say is, I take the BART to work every day, and the one thing that I can tell you is that everybody to the right of me and everybody to the left of me is listening to something. So to say that people aren't using radio isn't true. People are using audio content. And there's a market out there, but most of them are not listening to Pacifica. So the question there is why, and what can we do to change that?
Well, and I would also offer that if there is a well-defined and designed plan to, enhance the online capabilities and try to follow the audience to those media platforms, that the radio stations can still provide a very valuable function in promoting all of that content to the existing audience, and networking just like people do on Facebook to say, well, if you like KPFA, then you've got to tell your friends. Because the commercial media have big budgets for TV ads and for billboards, and you're not going to have that. But the radio stations are a good way to help transition the existing audience to new ways of accessing the same programming.
And Peter, I would challenge your figures on the number of people in different age groups listening to the radio. I mean, the figures are right, but they don't take into account how many people are listening to the radio over the internet, because Arbitron doesn't measure that.
You're right.
So there's a lot going out over the internet rather than over the airwaves. And what we found, I've been involved with the low power radio movement, having a terrestrial station is incredibly important in giving you an identity, even if 90% of the people are actually listening over the internet.
Now, you've been involved in the setup of a new low power FM in Alameda. Any lessons that you can draw from that could apply to the future of Pacifica and KPFA?
You have to have Tracy Rosenberg's help in doing it.
Oh, that's sweet.
Money and volunteers, it's a tough job. Money and volunteers are hard to raise. When people hear about the local radio stations, they're excited because they want to do programming, but then there's all the nitty-gritty work to raising money, finding a place for the transmitter, finding a place for the studio, and so on. We've been fairly lucky on that. And KACR, K Alameda Community Radio, is going to go on the air about June 20th. So it is happening.
And let's give the frequency. When people drive through Alameda, I want them to tune it in.
96.1. The studios are at Encinal High School. The transmitter's on top of the Masonic building on Alameda Street. The Masons were, Masons are not radicals. The Masons were very enthusiastic. We're paying $30 a month for having a
That's better than the Empire State Building.
Yeah, much better. We have better management. So it's an exciting project for everyone around.
And I
Tracy?
think you can also hear it in Fruitvale or the edges of East Oakland. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can.
It's important to say.
And a whole movement of this is a whole other program, but a whole movement of social disobedience, of people broadcasting without a license during the 90s, forced the FCC to recognize these 100-watt low-power stations, which weren't permitted before.
Well, Kevin Dunifer was your client, right?
Stephen Dunifer, yes.
Stephen, yeah,
yes.
and Radio Free Berkeley.
That's right, and the partial victory we won in that case is part of what moved things along. Yes.
Yeah, and an interesting part of KACR that's also relevant to sort of the Pacifica conversation is the other half of the station is connected to a school. Encinal, is it middle school? High school.
Yeah.
But the point is that it's sort of being sponsored by that school because the kids get to play on the radio. With everything that we're saying about old people in Pacifica and kids hate radio, those kids love being on the radio, and they are really learning things and doing things. So we should understand that this whole business of sort of self-expression on the part of the young remains valid. And I mean, after all, it's pretty hard to be on TV with the exception of wonderful places like here. And radio has always been low barrier to entry, low cost, and volunteer friendly. And I think that can be passed on.
And
So
so we need to save it as an independent alternative channel, not just let it get swallowed up in public broadcasting, which is sort of government broadcasting, or in commercial broadcasting.
I've got about a minute for each of you for a final comment. Bill Crozier, let me start with you, please.
Well, thanks. And, just to respond briefly to what you were talking about, too, let's think of Facebook Live and other kind of things. Some programs and some stations are using that to really boost their listenership and viewership, because it does bring in video. And I think we need to look at using social media a lot more effectively. And I encourage anybody, tuning into this broadcast is to tell your friends during social media, your email, however you tell people about your favorite shows. I think that's the future, and I think it's a thing we can exploit a lot more. I want a strong Pacifica, and I want all of our stations to be doing really well, and we can work together to make that happen.
All right, I'll start. My favorite shows are Flashpoints and Blues by the Bay. I really love both of those shows on KPFA. Adrian, how would you like to wrap up?
I would like you to listen to my program, Pushing Limits, the KPFA's disability program. But I want to say the word community, because I think the heart of KPFA, the heart of Pacifica, really is the community. And the low power stations really show us that. So to have a functional community station, you have to have a functional community. They have to be involved, whether they vote or not. They have to care about each other enough to put aside some of the disagreements that we have. We kind of tend to be a little bit of a hyper-competitive, I'm right and you're wrong kind of group, and we have to figure out a way to change that. I think we can. I think we need to, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Adrian. Peter Frank?
I think it's very important for people concerned about Pacifica and the kind of radio and kind of media it is to understand that Pacifica has two entirely separate sets of problems. There's a short-term problem caused by bad governance and other factors, and Bill Crozier is doing a terrific job of catching up and dealing with those short-term problems. But Pacifica, and he'll be able to stabilize it soon, I think, but the long-term problems about the nature of the organization and the media environment they're functioning in are barely being touched, and those are two entirely separate problem areas.
Thank you for parsing it that way. That's very helpful. Tracy Rosenberg?
Well, we are in a time of humongous mainstream media propaganda and certainly a growing unreliability. Nobody believes anything that they're told out there. So I do think that people's media that emanates from ordinary people is as important as it has ever been, because there's a certain amount of fundamental authenticity to that is harder and harder to find out there. So I don't think the content that's on Pacifica is replaceable, unimportant, or trivial, although there's some that I like more than others. And since you asked, I'm a hard duck radio girl.
Well, I want to thank each of you for joining us here for this special program this evening. Adrian Lauby, Peter Frank, Tracy Rosenberg, and by phone, Bill Crozier, who is the new interim Executive Director of Pacifica Radio, joining us from New York today. Thank you all.
Thank you for having us.
Peter.